Today's case is one that is extremely controversial with a lot of mixed opinions out there. It begs the question of when is self-defense truly self-defense and when is self-defense just an excuse? This one is very complicated, and that is why there is such a massive division out there on, is this person guilty? Were they just defending themselves? What are the details and the nuts and bolts that went into this crime and everything leading up to it? What escalated? I mean, guys, it's a touchy one, so I want to warn you, you may have heard about this case. There are a lot of details we're going to cover, and I want to know where you stand on this, because I know for sure that not everybody is going to see eye to eye on this one. It's a case that keeps getting brought back into the front and center of the media, and there is just so much ongoing conversation about it. So we're going to dive right in, guys. My name is Elise. This is 10 to Life. Buckle up and let's get right into it. On September 28, 2017, a police officer was making his nightly rounds on the streets in Poughkeepsie, New York. At around 2 a.m., he drove up behind a car that was stopped at a red light. When the light turned green, the car in front of him didn't move, so he honked his horn, thinking that the driver either wasn't paying attention or maybe had possibly fallen asleep. When the car still didn't move, he got out of his cruiser and approached the vehicle. At the same time, a small, 5-foot woman, no more than 100 pounds, stepped out of the driver's seat. She was shoeless and looking very distressed. He could see 2 children asleep in the back seat, and the officer thought that maybe the woman was lost, or that there was some kind of medical emergency. However, nothing could have prepared him for what this woman was about to admit to, right there in the middle of the road. She told the officer that her name was Nikki Addimando, and that she had just shot her boyfriend in self-defense. When investigators raced to the couple's apartment, the evidence they found led them to believe that Nicole wasn't telling the truth about what happened that night. In fact, they would begin to think that she had been planning to kill her boyfriend Chris Grover for years and had manipulated people into believing that she was a victim of physical domestic disputes. In this case, we already know who pulled the trigger of the gun that killed Chris. But the most important question that still needed to be answered was why? Was Nicole actually a victim in this situation? Or was she a calculated killer who stole the life and tarnished the reputation of an innocent man? Now, to learn the truth, we need to go back to the very beginning. Back to before Chris and Nicole even met, and then get into the tangled web that soon began to weave and brew between the two of them. Nikki Addimando, who goes by Nikki, was born in 1988, and at the age of 4, she moved to Poughkeepsie, New York with her family. Up until this point, she was described as energetic, carefree, and an outgoing little girl. However, all of that would change when Nikki went over to her new friend Caitlin's house for their very first sleepover. Caitlin lived with her mom and her mom's boyfriend, who she referred to as Uncle Butch. The night of the sleepover, Nikki was awoken to Butch pulling her to the bottom of the bed where she was sleeping next to Caitlin. Caitlin was awake, but she didn't help Nikki, who Butch began to violate. It was later discovered that Butch had already been doing the same thing to Caitlin for several years. When Nikki's mother Belinda found blood in her underwear, she took her to the pediatrician, who said that the injury to her privates was probably caused during gymnastics practice. And at that point, Nikki reportedly changed from being a happy little girl to extremely clingy, anxious, shy, and quiet, and even wrote things in her journal like, "I don't like Uncle Butch anymore," and "I have secrets, but she won't care or believe me." However, her mom Belinda never asked Nikki about any of those things, and didn't even acknowledge that she knew something had happened to her until later, when Nikki was a teenager. After that, Nikki never discussed the incident again and would never get any sort of therapy for what happened to her until she was an adult and could take herself to counseling. The experience changed how she trusted people and how she developed relationships with men. Nikki recalled that as a teenager, her mom told her stories about being drugged and attacked in a gruesome way while out on a date. Also about being hit by a boyfriend before she ever had kids, and just how that kind of thing was just a risk of dating. Very cavalier, very nonchalant. So Nikki obviously had a lot to unpack during her therapy sessions, especially since her mom knew what happened to her as a child and didn't do anything about it, and tried to normalize different types of physical harm as just a regular part of being a woman and the risk of dating. In 2008, Nikki was 19 years old, and she began working at a local gym called Mr. Todd's Gymnastics. There she became a children's gymnastics coach and met a fellow coach and coworker, 21-year-old Christopher Grover. Chris was said to be super energetic, outgoing, and very charming. His students at the gym loved him and how fun he was as a coach, and he was well liked by their parents as well. Chris was only a little bit taller than Nikki, with a typical gymnast body, short but muscular, and he even had a black belt in Taekwondo. While working closely together, the two developed a very deep friendship before things slowly developed into something romantic. And when it did, Nikki confided in Chris about what happened to her as a child and how terrified she was about sex and about getting close to somebody in that way. According to Nikki, Chris was very supportive, very compassionate, and understanding about how she felt, and he told her that he would wait until she was ready. They both waited about a year before ever getting physical, but afterwards, Nikki said that there was a change in Chris and his empathy towards her feelings about intimacy. Nikki said that after they were intimate once, he all of a sudden started expecting it all of the time and nagging her until she gave in after initially saying no. She said sometimes she would even wake up to him taking advantage of her while she was asleep, and whenever she would ask him to stop, he never would. During this time, Nikki was living with her mother, Belinda, in an apartment complex that she managed. Nikki told Belinda about the things that Chris was doing, to which she responded by calling her a prude and saying that she needed to try her best to satisfy Chris. Instead of telling Nikki something like, "You're young, you can find somebody better to date, what he's doing is wrong, leave him," etc., Belinda apparently told her daughter, "Sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do." And in addition to the just horrible advice and life guidance to her daughter, Belinda often invited maintenance workers over to their apartment to take shots of alcohol together between jobs. One of these workers showed up one day while Nikki was home alone and told her that he was there to do some repairs. While in the apartment, according to Nikki, the worker came on to her and tried to give her a kiss. When she resisted, he slapped her and ended up forcing himself on her. Nikki didn't tell Belinda what happened because she knew her mother was friends with this worker, and she felt ashamed, like Belinda would blame her or think that she didn't do enough to fight him off. Nikki said that the worker attacked her another time before she decided to tell Chris about what had happened. She expected Chris to be angry at the worker, maybe want to beat him up or something, and comfort her about what had happened. But when she told him, he reportedly said, "Is this your excuse for not wanting to have sex with me? You must like it rough then," referring to the fact that it happened more than once. Nikki was allegedly shocked by Chris's response because he had been so understanding and kind when she had told him about what had happened to her as a child. So she started to wonder if she did bring this upon herself, and maybe even invited it to happen more than once because she didn't report the first incident. After her conversation with Chris, instead of helping her turn in the worker or trying to support her through it, he apparently started becoming more violent toward Nikki and doing things in the bedroom, like choking, some slapping, restraining her, things of that nature. And she felt like this was some sort of punishment that was brought on by putting herself in a situation where she was used in that way by somebody else. It seemed almost like Chris took it personally and was jealous instead of angry and hurt on Nikki's behalf. After this, she stopped feeling safe emotionally and physically to come to Chris about these things. Since the maintenance worker had keys to all of the apartments, he came in and attacked her several more times over the span of a couple of years. Later, when Nikki finally decided to get therapy for the things that she had been through, it became obvious that she was dealing with so much trauma and inner turmoil that she would sometimes confuse and overlap instances of physical harm from Chris and the worker. It was often hard for her to decipher specific instances because everything started to kind of blend together in her mind, which is not uncommon for victims of any type of physical harm. By 2011, many of Nikki's close friends started noticing changes in her and said that she seemed to be even more anxious than usual. Even though Nikki was an extremely gentle and soft-spoken person, she became even more skittish. She wasn't sleeping well or eating much and just seemed to not be doing well. Many of the friends attributed these changes to stress caused by Nikki now studying early childhood education and working at a preschool while continuing to work at the gym. However, they noticed bruises on her on several occasions, various injuries, and they also noticed how she started wearing long sleeves and scarves even when it was hot outside. She always seemed to have a plausible story about these injuries, especially since she was coaching children in gymnastics who might accidentally bump or kick her during practice.
At the gym, I started noticing some things that just did not seem right. Finger marks on her neck and bruises on her neck. Parents talking that Chris could never do anything like that. There were many parents saying, "What is he doing to her?"
During this time, the father of one of her gymnastics students started to take notice of Nikki's injuries. He was a police officer and knew something about the excuses she gave him just wasn't right. After several conversations, he was able to get Nikki to admit to being hurt, but she refused to tell him who was responsible. He offered for Nikki to move in with him, his wife, and children in an effort to get her away from whoever it was that was causing her these injuries. Chris, who was living at home, couldn't really protest her moving in with this family, but he apparently wasn't really worried about Nikki telling the officer about the things he had done to her. He and even Nikki's own mother had convinced her that what Chris was doing was just a normal part of relationships. At the end of the day, Nikki mostly wanted to get away from the maintenance worker, and she accepted this officer's invitation to move in with his family. Nikki said that at first she thought of the 45-year-old like a protector and even a father figure. However, the longer she lived with the family, the more uncomfortable she started to become, especially when the officer would come talk to her late at night. According to Nikki, he started to come on to her sexually, and this time, she just let it happen. Later, an expert would say that what the officer did was classic exploitation of a trauma victim by holding food, shelter, safety, and status over her head. During this time, Nikki was still in a relationship with Chris, but she wasn't going to make the same mistake of telling him what was going on this time. She felt like he would definitely blame her and was afraid of what he would do. By 2012, Nikki's friends were even more worried about her because she started having severe panic attacks. Her personality was nothing like it used to be, and even though Nikki only told them bits and pieces of the things that she had been through, one of them decided to email a domestic center to try to get advice on how to help her. During one of Nikki's panic attacks, the friend took her to the emergency room, where she was found to be extremely malnourished, dehydrated, and also pregnant. To Nikki's surprise, Chris was extremely excited about the news of her being pregnant. The two of them moved into a basement apartment together in a nearby town, and during this time, Nikki said that Chris started being like his old self again. During her pregnancy, he was gentle, sweet, and caring, and she felt like maybe this baby was what they needed for their relationship to get better. Nikki also started seeing a new therapist named Robin Nason, and she began opening up more about what she had endured. Life was looking better for Nikki. Nikki was starting her healing process, her relationship wasn't as rocky, and she and Chris were both excited to become parents. It wasn't until after their son Ben was born that things started to go downhill again. After giving birth to Ben, Nikki decided to quit her job at the preschool and focus on setting up her own photography business and selling little homemade booties for infants. She said that Chris was being a great father and was super helpful with Ben, but about 6 weeks after he was born, he started becoming pushy with Nikki about being intimate again, even though she said she wasn't ready. After being turned down a few times, Nikki said that once while they were standing in Ben's nursery, Chris slammed her face into the doorframe and forced himself onto her. She said that after this it seemed like he took a liking to forced acts, and felt like denying him that way of doing things would make her a prude, like her mother had said. Soon after these non-consensual attacks started taking place, on one occasion, Nikki noticed a light flashing in the room and realized that Chris had been filming her without her knowledge. She was extremely angry and embarrassed, and she snuck the memory card from his camera to one of her therapy appointments with Robin Nason. When she showed Robin part of the video, she reportedly blamed herself and asked Robin if she had not told Chris no enough during that incident. Robin stated that Nikki was too terrified to confront Chris about the videos and multiple other pictures on his camera. By 2014, Nikki was pregnant with her and Chris's second child. This time, Chris was not as gentle and sweet like he was with her during the first pregnancy, and it seemed like his aggression and fantasies only escalated. During one instance, Chris tried to approach Nikki in the kitchen to give her a kiss, but when she turned away, he got angry and slammed her face into the counter 2 times before forcing himself on her. A few days later, her face and jaw were so swollen that she could not even chew, and that's when she decided to call a domestic assistance program. This is when she would meet a social worker named Elizabeth Clifton, who would help Nikki and also become one of her very close friends. This program convinced Nikki to get a medical exam, and in the notes the examiner wrote that Nikki spoke so softly that you could barely even hear what she was saying. She refused to file a police report and told Elizabeth and other social workers that she was afraid that Chris would take their son away from her. Only 2 days after this first exam, Nikki was sent to a second examination after another incident occurred in the home. According to Nikki, she had been cooking Ben eggs for breakfast, and Chris told her that she had better have made enough for him too. She said that she replied, "Yes, sir," in a very sarcastic tone, which made Chris extremely angry. She said he grabbed a metal spoon and held it to the flame of the gas stove burner. He held her other arm while he burned her with the spoon in several places. The examiner took pictures of Nikki's injuries, which included bite marks on her shoulder and back, as well as burns all over her body, including her private area. She again refused to file a police report against the advice of Elizabeth, social workers, and the examiner. In 2015, after their daughter Faye was born, according to Nikki, Chris became addicted to very violent adult internet material. He started to want to act out things that he had seen in these videos and even made elaborate contraptions to use in these, aggressive style acts against Nikki. He would tie her up, attack her, and one time he even attacked her using a weapon. He choked her until she passed out, and all of this was captured on camera. When Nikki's friend learned that Chris had been filming these acts, they searched the internet for usernames that could be associated with Chris, and found one called Grover Respect on a very popular adult website. Under this account were several videos of Nikki and these acts taking place, but Chris made sure to never show his face on the videos, only Nikki, and without Nikki's consent. However, one of Nikki's confidants reported to a detective that Chris was uploading these videos without Nikki's consent, and they drafted an affidavit for her to sign to get him arrested. Nikki had heard that if somebody reports themselves to be a victim of harm, then the children in the home will automatically be taken by CPS until they can determine that the children have not been harmed as well. So this terrified Nikki, and this was another main reason she didn't want to report Chris to the police. She didn't want to lose her kids. Chris had also allegedly threatened Nikki that if she ever told anybody about the videos, he would tell everyone that she liked it, and that everybody would think that she is, insert slanderous word here. Due to these and many other reasons, Nikki refused to sign that affidavit, which is just so sad. Just a woman completely broken. By 2017, Nikki had become close with a midwife who worked at the same practice that helped deliver her daughter Faye. She went there for issues that she was having down below and also had confided in her about Chris and how she was afraid of losing custody of Ben and Faye if she ever left him. During one of her exams after an alleged physical attack by Chris, the midwife reported that Nikki was so swollen in the front and back that she couldn't even perform the exam, and that the insides were on the outside. When she told Nikki that she needed to report what happened, Nikki said that Chris would just say that she had done it to herself. The midwife, her therapist, and her friends urged Nikki to start documenting and taking photos of all of her injuries in case she ever needed them for a custody battle in court. Nikki already had some documentation from some medical exams and started taking her own photos as well. Elizabeth Clifton had said that over the course of their friendship, she offered several times for Nikki and the children to come move in with her, and a few times she did come very close. She said that on at least one occasion, Nikki was so anxious and drove past Elizabeth's house over and over again before ultimately deciding to return back home in fear of what Chris would do if she left. On September 27, 2017, Chris and Nikki got a visit from CPS. An anonymous parent from the gym where Chris still worked reported that she had seen him losing his temper with some of the students, and also saw Nikki covered in marks, and was worried about her and the children at home. The CPS worker wrote on a piece of paper, "Are you safe right now?" and secretly showed it to Nikki, who nodded yes. The worker asked Nikki if there were any weapons in the house, but she lied and said that there wasn't, even though Chris did own a gun. When the worker interviewed Ben, he told her that his parents fought and that his dad grabbed his mom. The worker questioned them about what Ben told her, and Chris and Nikki both said that they just had normal fights and arguments like every other couple does. The worker didn't see any reason to take emergency action, but asked them if they could provide the phone numbers of a few people who could provide her with more information. When the caseworker left, according to Nikki, Chris told her that she needed to call all of those people whose number they gave and tell them that everything was fine. He said that she needed to make sure that they all told CPS that everything was good at their house if they called to ask any questions. Nikki's worst nightmare would be having her children taken away. And after Chris left for work, she called family, friends, and even Chris's boss to make sure that they wouldn't say anything disparaging to CPS. She texted her sister, "Mention no injuries. I'm a good mom. He's a good dad." When Chris returned home that evening, according to Nikki, he seemed different. He was calm and even kind towards her, and she thought that maybe the CPS visit had acted as some sort of wake-up call for him to change his behavior. She stated that they were intimate after the kids went to sleep, and this time it was much more gentle than the violence that she had grown accustomed to. However, Chris's calmness started to become a little eerie, and Nikki's intuition told her that something wasn't right. She stated that at one point in the evening, she suggested to Chris that maybe they needed to take some time apart from each other. Instead of verbally responding, Chris went and retrieved his gun. He called her to come over and look at it, and he began showing her how it worked, while she nervously watched him load the gun with bullets. He then casually said, "You know I could kill you in your sleep." Nikki started to feel very unsafe, and like his behavior was indicating that he might have been planning to kill her. After this, she went in and checked on Ben and Faye in their room, and even though there was a window, she didn't feel like she could get out with the kids safely without Chris noticing. She then decided she was going to take a shower, and while she was showering, Chris came into the bathroom and said, "I could shoot you in there, but then it would be too loud of an echo." Nikki didn't know if he was just trying to scare her because she had mentioned splitting up, or if the CPS visit made him feel angry that people were starting to notice what was going on. All she knew was that she was very afraid. When she got out of the shower, Nikki stated that Chris forced himself onto her as soon as she walked into the living room. Afterward, he told her to lay on top of him on the couch. So Nikki laid there in fear for what felt like an eternity until she thought that Chris had finally fallen asleep. However, when she tried to sneak up off of him, Chris woke up and pulled the gun out of the couch cushion that he was laying on. Nikki said she went to jump up from the couch, kneed Chris in the groin, and hit away his arm that was holding the gun. When she did this, Chris dropped the gun onto the floor, and Nikki was able to quickly grab it and point it at him while he laid back on the couch. He looked at her and said in a very condescending way, "Do you feel powerful?" While Nikki pointed the gun in his direction, she assessed her options and tried to think of a way that she could safely get her and the kids out of this situation. They were between the children's bedroom door and the front door, and in either direction Nikki could go, she felt like Chris would attack her and take the gun away. Chris was laying back on the pillow, not worried about Nikki shooting him, probably because of how much he had already lowered her self-esteem and confidence. So he said to her, "You'll never shoot me. You're going to give me the gun, and I'm going to kill you. Then I'm going to take my own life, and then your kids will have nobody." He barely finished his sentence before Nikki lunged toward him with the gun, pulling the trigger as soon as the barrel touched his forehead. In that moment, Nikki said it was a matter of kill or be killed. After Nikki shot Chris, in a state of shock, she knew she had to get her kids out of the house. She went into her bathroom and noticed that the tub was running and Chris's laptop was fully submerged. She figured he must have put that in there when she was checking on the children and wanted to destroy it due to the videos he had taken of her still possibly being on the hard drive. This solidified to Nikki that he actually was planning on killing her that night and wanted to destroy any evidence of prior attacks. Nikki was in such a state of anxiety and adrenaline, she couldn't even get the bathtub to turn off and decided to just leave it alone. She went and got the children in their car seats and started to drive. When she finally came to a red light, everything started to slow down, and she was able to pause for a moment to think about what had just happened. She sat there in sort of a daze, even after that light turned green, and wasn't snapped out of it until she heard the car behind her beep their horn. That car, of course, turned out to be a police officer who would be the first person to learn about what had just taken place back at their home. After the officer was able to calm Nikki down enough to explain what was going on, she told him about the CPS visit, some of the previous attacks, the injuries, and the sex that took place earlier in the evening, which was more gentle than usual. She told him about the attack after her shower, the threats that he had made, the struggle, and ultimately the shooting.
He said, I will kill you and will come and the kids will have nobody.
She asked the cop what was going to happen, and he told her not to worry, and at this point she wasn't in any trouble. He told Nikki to wait outside of her car while he went and called another officer, and during this time Nikki called Elizabeth to come and meet her at the traffic light. After Elizabeth got there, the officer told her to wait inside the car until they were done talking to Nikki. When the second officer showed up, the first explained to him in private that the more he started talking to Nikki, the more he started to feel as though the shooting wasn't actually in self-defense, but possibly happened either during or after an emotional argument. He said her storyline didn't make a lot of sense, but that nothing could be known for sure at this point in the investigation. While Elizabeth sat there and watched the police question Nikki, she saw an ambulance go past her with lights and sirens on, but then go past her again in the other direction with the lights off. This led her to believe that Chris had died, and Elizabeth reportedly felt relieved because she had always feared that Nikki would be the one to end up dead. The police asked Elizabeth if she could follow them to the police station where they would need to continue their investigation into what happened to Chris. Nikki was brought into a room for questioning, and another detective asked her to retell the events from that evening. He also read her Miranda rights and told her that it was just procedure for him to do that before anybody starts talking. He asked her if she ever watched crime shows or anything like that, and she told him that she didn't. So he briefly explained the Miranda rights before Nikki continued retelling what happened. She told him the same timeline as she told the other officer, and also told him about how some counselors and other professionals had documentation of domestic disputes and attacks over the years. When Nikki started to get a feeling that the detective wasn't as on her side as she originally thought, she said, "It's obviously self-defense, right?" To which he responded, "I can't make that determination right now." Nikki didn't know much about the legal system, but she did know that she should maybe ask for a lawyer, based on the vibe that she was getting from this detective and the way that the questioning was going. When she asked him if he thought that she should call a lawyer, he said, "Are you just going to pick one out of the phone book?" Nikki felt lost and didn't know how to go about finding a lawyer herself, and the phone book comment seemed more snide rather than actual advice. After that, the detective left her alone for around 30 minutes before returning back and placing her under arrest for the murder of Chris Grover. Nikki finally did get a lawyer after she was arrested, a public defender named Kara Gary. When her trial began in March 2019, she pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder, first- and second-degree manslaughter, and second-degree criminal possession of a weapon. Many witnesses would come to testify on Nikki's behalf, including her friends that knew about what had been going on over the years, and her main confidant, Elizabeth Clifton, who knew more of the horrific details and had seen the videos and even saw the homemade objects that Chris made to allegedly use on Nikki. The midwife would testify about the severe injuries to Nikki's private area that she saw during the exams, and many photos of injuries were shown in court. The court also saw videos and photos that Chris allegedly took of Nikki during these attacks and that he had posted on adult websites. This was extremely hard on Nikki because Chris supposedly always told her that if she were ever to tell anyone, he would show everyone the pictures and humiliate her, which is exactly what happened in court. However, Nikki's team ran into some hurdles when they were unable to show the jury the username Grover Respect that had posted that adult content. The nurses and therapists that she visited and spoke to about the violence were unable to say whether or not Nikki had named Chris as the perpetrator because it technically could be hearsay. There were tons of people in support of Nikki who would show up every day in support of her and other victims of domestic issues. However, there were just as many people in there in support of Chris, who believed that Nikki was painting a false picture of him and lying about everything that happened in the past and leading up to the murder. Friends and family of Chris testified that he was nothing like the person Nikki was making him out to be. They said that the Chris that they knew was gentle, kind, and loved his family. The prosecutor on the case, Channa Kraus, was convinced that Nikki had not acted in self-defense, and even if the past violence were true, that she killed him while he was asleep in cold blood. Channa Kraus argued the fact that Chris was found laying down on the couch when he was shot, indicating that he was asleep, even though Nikki explained why he was laying on the couch during the shooting. She also said that Nikki wasn't credible because she had accused other men of physical attacks in the past. She tried to cast doubt on the documentation of the domestic disputes and the attacks that took place that Nikki had gathered, and stated that it wasn't impossible for her to have inflicted those injuries on herself, even though many of them were on her back, which would have been nearly impossible to do on her own. She said that there was no way of knowing if Chris was actually the one who took and uploaded the photos and videos of Nikki on those adult websites, because the male was always off camera, and it could have been Nikki posting them herself. She stated that there were times when Nikki would text Chris very angry, which is not something apparently that a victim would necessarily do. She also said that Nikki accused the police officer she lived with and the maintenance worker of attacks over the years, and there's no way of knowing if the photos of bruises and injuries were actually inflicted by them rather than Chris. Shanna Kraus also showed some text messages that Nikki sent Elizabeth Clifton, where she sarcastically said, "Well, I haven't figured out a way to kill him yet, so I'm still here," with an emoji face, obviously kidding with someone who knew that her relationship wasn't going well, but still a callous and not great comment to say now given the situation. However, the jury wasn't shown the full context of that conversation, and they left out parts where Nikki said that she just needed to wait it out until the children were in school and she could go back to work and things would be different. She also said that no one would ever believe her about the things that Chris was doing because everybody loved him, and she didn't want to risk him going to jail because she thought his parents might try to then take the children away from her. Shanna Kraus told the jury that one sarcastic text was an indication that Nikki had been planning to kill Chris all along, and that she had been fabricating stories and collecting evidence for years in preparation to kill him and lie about being a victim.
Putnam County Chief Assistant District Attorney Hannah Kraus says Nikki's story doesn't add up.
We know that it's not popular to say that a woman who's claiming domestic is lying. It's not popular to say she was manipulating everybody around her.
Kraus believes Nikki self-inflicted injuries and made up stories to garner sympathy and attention. She says Nikki shot Chris in cold blood.
I think people need to understand what really happened here.
And what really happened here?
Chris Grover was asleep when she killed him. That's what happened here.
Nikki herself took the stand and was asked all of the basic questions that every victim of domestic issues or any sort of targeted attacks are asked. Like, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you report it? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Trying to discredit her in any way that they could.
What made you want to testify in the trial?
Silence didn't serve me well, and it was time to speak. I had to. The truth is worth fighting for.
Even though a medical examiner told the jury there is no medical or scientific way of knowing whether or not Chris was asleep when he was shot, Shanna Kraus convinced them that he must have been, and that Nikki was a master manipulator, a liar, and a killer. The jury didn't get to hear from a social worker who facilitated visits between Nikki and her children during the first couple of months in jail, and how they would always check her entire body for boo-boos. Ben told that social worker that mommy had been hurt by daddy, and drew several pictures depicting some of this violence, and even drew red marks on a doll's private areas.
The arguments that were made to the jury were basically, you know, it's a very trite phrase to say blame the victim. In the area of domestic, that's exactly what we do, because the DA in this case and in so many other cases take what we know is the impact of domestic violence on a survivor and use that to try to convince people not to believe the survivor.
Without getting to hear all of that evidence, the jury found Nikki guilty on the charges of second-degree murder and second-degree criminal possession of a handgun, and she was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. Now, obviously, many people were appalled by the jury's decision to charge a victim of severe trauma and possible harm. But other people were really convinced that this was some real-life version of Gone Girl, and that Nikki had been planning all of this for years and injuring herself to later have justification for killing Chris. Even though Nikki's team had planned on appealing the court's decision, only a few weeks later, the governor of New York signed a new law called the Domestic Survivors Justice Act. This new law would allow a judge to exercise discretion in the sentencing of a defendant who is proven to have been a victim, and if that contributed to the crime that they committed. If Nikki was found eligible for this new Survivors Justice Act, she could have her sentence lessened to as few as 5 years. However, in February of 2020, the judge made the decision not to find Nikki eligible, and stated in his reasoning that Nikki's history was undetermined and inconsistent, that Nikki had options and support to leave, and the fact that Chris was laying down when he was killed was a factor as well. The judge told Nikki, "What it boils all down to is this: you didn't have to kill him." After the judge's decision, Nikki asked to make a statement to the court. She was visibly nervous, shaking, and she quietly said, "I wish more than anything this ended another way. If it had, I wouldn't be in this courtroom, but I wouldn't be alive either, and I wanted to live. So often we end up dead or where I'm standing, alive, but still not free." 1 year later in 2020, a new legal team began working on an appeal for Nikki pro bono because they believed wholeheartedly that she had been failed by the justice system.
Why spend your free time doing this for free?
You don't want to be a part of a system, which I am. Sorry. You don't want to be part of a system, the criminal justice system, as a lawyer, that creates injustice. The law degree gives you a remarkable ability to change things, one client at a time.
Why do you think so many people are dedicated to her cause?
Nikki kind of embodies this goodness that attracts people, and when you see it and when you're touched by it, it's impossible to ignore it.
The appeal was filed and argued several points, including that crucial pieces of evidence were not shown to the jury. The prosecution allowed for misleading testimony, and the judge did not follow the statutory commands of the Domestic Survivors Justice Act when considering her sentence.
We believe that this was a conviction that was a miscarriage of justice in so many ways.
One of the key points that the defense argued was the original judge's refusal to apply the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, a brand new law that would have taken into account the alleged and lessened Addimando's sentence. And now, for a second time, the young mother's fate rests in the hands of the court.
The Court of Appeals did not overturn her conviction, but ruled in favor of Nikki deserving a reduced sentence under the Survivors Justice Act, and they changed her sentence from 19 years to life to 7.5 years, with 5 years already served. Nikki's release is scheduled for 2024, but her legal team is still working to get her out sooner by hopefully convincing the governor of New York to grant her clemency. While Nikki has been serving time, her children have been living with family, but have seen her weekly, either in person or via video chat. Nikki says that they play pretend and act out things that they are going to do once she is finally released. She has said that even though she is the one in prison, her children are also serving a sentence as long as they aren't together as a family. At this point in 2023, she has still not received a pardon from the governor of New York. So that's where we are right now with this case. Now, it's important to note throughout the entire trial and still to this day, Chris Grover's family and friends believe that he was falsely accused by Nikki, saying she is a manipulative murderer.
My son never hurt anybody. He lived for Nikki. He lived for those kids. He was a gentle soul who was full of life, and she took it.
The only question I would have for them and for the prosecutor in this case is why would Nikki want to kill Chris if everything that she said was untrue? They weren't even married, and life insurance wasn't something on the table, so what would be her motivation to severely injure herself, go to the lengths of documenting years of these attacks, and then kill him? All for attention? Psychiatrists that have spoken to Nikki stated that she has a habit of minimizing the things that she endured, not making them more dramatic, minimizing them, and also that she blames herself for a lot of things. I just can't think of a reason why Nikki would choose to go through all of this. Many people have been very critical of her and have tried to say things like there's no way that she could have been attacked by so many different men, but there are actually very well-known statistics that survivors of harm as children are 5 times more likely to experience other types of harm as adults. So it's not really hard to imagine somebody who was already so vulnerable being taken advantage of by more than one person. The amount of times that someone is attacked doesn't make them any less credible or make it somehow their fault. After the sentencing, a reporter was able to get in contact with a juror from the trial who said that Nikki was probably attacked and suffered domestic issues in her home, but they believed that Chris was asleep when she shot him, and that she had the opportunity to leave without killing him. Now, in my opinion, that makes their entire decision based on something that really isn't even proven to be factual, because the medical examiner testified that there would be no way of determining if Chris was asleep or not. However, there is something that sticks out to me that makes me wonder, was he really asleep? And we're going to get to that in a second. Several people said that Chris didn't seem like someone who would ever do those things, and that he was a great person and a father. But most people can at least admit that oftentimes we have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. Now, I'm not saying that every single thing Nikki has ever said is true, certainly not, or that the trauma she experienced couldn't have run together sometimes, maybe. But I think it's really dangerous to just write someone off like her as a liar and a cold-blooded killer. I think that by villainizing a survivor, it could make other victims feel afraid to speak up or even defend themselves if the situation came to that. It could reinforce the fear of not being believed or being prosecuted for self-defense. Now, how I mentioned there was a detail in Nikki's story that made me wonder, was this really Chris and self-defense, or was this something else? Going back to the bathtub was running and the laptop had been thrown in there. Now, according to Nikki, she said that she believes that Chris was planning to annihilate her, maybe even the whole family. That was his plan all along, so he wanted to destroy any evidence and threw it in the bathtub. And then she noticed it after she had shot him. Could very, very well be possible. But they had gone onto the couch, been intimate, he had her lay on top of him, and then he fell asleep. Then, when she tried to get up and go, that's when the gun was pulled out by him. They struggled for the gun, or she took it, and then that's when the shooting took place. But he was asleep on the couch before he woke up, according to Nikki. She also said, though, that the laptop, that she was so anxious after the shooting and discovering the laptop and grabbing her kids, that she couldn't even figure out a way to turn the bath water off. My question is, the bath water wasn't overflowing. So if Chris had been the one to throw that laptop in, turn on the bath water before devising his whole plan, but then fell asleep, and all of these things took place, how is it still running? How did it not overflow? Or could it have been, whether he was asleep or not, that she was so humiliated by those videos and photos, and she didn't want the world to see, which we know she did not want anybody to ever see those. So as she was collecting her kids after shooting Chris, did she turn on the bathtub and throw the laptop in and then beat it and run out of the house, leaving the tub still running? Because it seems to me if he had made this whole calculated move before they even were intimate, before he fell asleep, and the bathtub was still running, it just doesn't make sense to me. Unless I'm missing a detail here, guys, which tell me if I am. But it seems more likely that she's the one who threw it in there as a way to destroy it and then left it running. But what do you think? At the end of the day, the only two people who knew exactly what went on that night are Nikki and Chris, and only one of them is alive to tell their side of the story. I think it's okay for Chris's family and friends to remember the person that they knew and loved, but also consider that maybe they didn't know every single thing about him. Personally, I'm glad that Nikki will be able to reunite with her children, and I do hope that everyone involved in this situation is able to heal. Again, assuming that everything she said is true regarding this being self-defense. I don't want her reunited with her kids and out if she is just, a Gone Girl version 2.0 and planned this whole thing. Nikki has said that she wants to be an advocate for survivors who are unfairly incarcerated, and that even though this situation was incredibly sad, there is definitely a possibility for her to do some good in the world when she is released. So my question for you, do you think that Nikki killed Chris in self-defense, or did she make everything up over the years to kill him later for some unknown reason? Do you think that she should have gotten a lighter sentence, or even an appeal on her conviction? What do you think about this case? And if you are familiar with this case, because remember, there's a lot of division out there right now, so please, as a reminder, keep it kind in the comments. But if there's other details you've heard about this case that I missed, please let me know in the comments so that we can all kind of be up to date and get the conversation going below. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Keep it kind in the comments, but I do want to hear your opinion. Let's just all share it respectfully.